there are a couple of places, strings of our heart that we loan out to family, places that we empower to our families that belong to Christ alone. And according to Christ, family, although one of the most incredible things in our life, has the potential to be one of the greatest obstacles to us being fully devoted in our discipleship towards Him. One of those areas that we tend to give over to family in terms of power is the power of blessing. Now, this is a biblical language that we don't use a lot. One of the areas that we talk about blessing in relationship to family, though, is when guys try to get the blessing of their in-laws to marry their daughter, right? Many of you remember that conversation vividly. You've told that story many times. For some of you, it's somewhat funny. But the reality is, if you're in this room and you're married and you never really felt that blessing, there's a rift in the relationship with the in-laws. It continues forward. It's inevitable until that blessing comes in. And for me, I never really began to grasp the significance of blessing until I received it from my in-laws. So this is the way this took place. My wife and I, we've been married for several years. And my in-laws, one day they said, we really want to sit down. And they had this desire to formally pronounce a blessing over us. They had been going through this study at their church that was talking about the biblical role of blessing from parents to their kids and how significant it was. And they had really grown convinced that this was something that they felt like they needed to do. And as you can imagine, this is a little awkward. We're going to sit down and they're going to bless us. And it's not something that you typically do. But we sat down and they began to speak words of affirmation and favor and blessing over us. And they began to pray the blessing of God over us. And this ended up ambushing me as one of the most emotionally shocking experiences of my life. I completely found myself unraveled by the power, both personally and in terms of the healing in our relationship that took place. And from that moment forward, I began to examine and look into what does it mean theologically for parents to pass a blessing down to their children, and psychologically, how is this significant? And I have come to the conclusion that every single human being has a deep, deep longing to receive a blessing from their parents. Every son, every daughter deeply longs to get this blessing from mom and this blessing from dad. Biblically, blessing, it's more than just saying I love you. It's the experience of love, and there's something spiritual in there too, and it's affirmation, it's affection, it's favor, it's wishing the best, it's support, it's praying this prayer of blessing over your kids. I believe that every kid deep down really, really longs for this. Theologically, I think we would say that we were all created to be in this relationship with God. Human beings, what God created us for. And to constantly live in His perfect blessing. And when sin entered the world and the relationship between God and humanity was broken, this void is left, and that desire for blessing gets transferred onto our parents. Sons want to hear that I love you, I'm proud of you. Daughters want to hear this. This blessing is something we deeply long for. And the tragedy of this is that even the greatest parents, their blessing will fall far short of the blessing that God alone can provide for you. And in the worst scenarios, even well-intending, well-meaning parents, they're going to fall so far short of providing the kind of blessing over us that we as human beings long for and need to receive from God. And what we have to understand as Christians is that when we are in Christ, Christ has made a relationship with God available to us. And one of the things that's very distinctive about the way Jesus talks about God is He always calls Him Father. Even when He talks to His disciples, He says, when He tells them to pray, He says, call God your Father. Jesus understands there's something so important about the familial relationship of God with us, restoring sons and daughters into a relationship with their perfect Father. And we have to know that when we are in Christ, what is true for Jesus becomes true for us. The words over Jesus from His Father, this is my Son who I love, with Him I am well pleased, that becomes ours in Christ. We can step into the blessing that is available to us from God. And I'm just going to say this. If you're in the room and you're one of those people and you're like, this is fluffy, whatever business, you most likely are someone that is lacking that blessing in your life. And you've pushed back from the feeling or the need of wanting it at all. And I can only say that because this is my own story. Deep down, human beings long to be blessed. And when we go through life and we don't have it, there's a sense of anxiety of people looking for it, longing for it, and people stay in all kinds of abusive relationships with parents because they're still hoping to hear the words that they never heard as a little girl, still hoping to hear the words they never heard as a little boy, or that longing gets transferred onto other things to send that message to them. And we have to understand as Christ followers, we cannot give that place to anyone other than God.